23 years old. That's how old Daniel was when he learned that money can't fix everything. But let me back up a bit, because this story starts on a perfect summer day in August 2019. Daniel had never waited for anything in his entire life. Not for food, not for cars, not even for answers. His father owned one of the biggest tech companies in America, the kind you've probably heard of. The kind that's worth billions with a B. Growing up like that changes you whether you realize it or not. That Tuesday morning, Daniel woke up in his father's estate in the Pennsylvania countryside. Not the main house where his father lived, but the guest house. Yeah, the guest house was bigger than most people's actual homes. He'd spent the weekend there after a charity gala, the kind where people pay $50,000 just to eat dinner and feel good about themselves. His brand new Mercedes was parked outside, silver and shining in the morning sun. He'd gotten it 3 weeks ago as an early birthday present. His fourth car, if you're counting. Daniel threw his leather weekend bag in the trunk and decided to take what he called the scenic route back to New York City. Now, you might be wondering why a guy with access to private jets would choose to drive 4 hours through rural Pennsylvania. The truth is, Daniel was bored. Not the kind of bored you feel on a lazy Sunday. The kind of bored that comes from having everything but feeling like you have nothing. His father wanted him to join the company, start from the bottom, learn the business. But Daniel didn't want to be just another rich kid playing office. He wanted to prove himself, though he had no idea how. So he drove. Windows down, music loud, the world blurring past him at 80 miles per hour. About 60 miles away from his father's estate, a man named Robert was checking his cornfields. Robert was 60 years old, with hands that told stories of 50 years working the land. His grandfather bought this farm back in 1952. When a handshake still meant something and 100 acres felt like a kingdom. Robert's day started at 5 in the morning, like it had every day for the past 40 years. Feed the chickens, check the irrigation, inspect the crops. The farm wasn't making much money these days. Big agricultural companies had changed everything. Small farms like his were barely surviving. But Robert stayed because this land held his history, his family's sweat and dreams. His daughter, Lisa, had moved to Philadelphia 3 years ago. Got herself a good job at a law firm. Robert was proud of her, prouder than he'd ever been of anything. But the house felt empty without her. Too quiet. Sometimes he'd set 2 plates for dinner before remembering she wasn't coming home. That afternoon, around 3 o'clock, Robert finished his work and climbed into his old pickup truck. The thing was from 1998, had over 200,000 miles on it, and the air conditioning hadn't worked in 5 years. But it ran, and that's what mattered. He was heading home when he noticed the storm clouds building up in the west. Dark ones, the kind that meant trouble. Meanwhile, Daniel was about an hour outside of New York when his dashboard lit up like a Christmas tree. Engine temperature warning. Oil pressure warning. Check engine light. His perfect 3-week-old Mercedes was dying. He pulled over to the shoulder of a 2-lane country road. Middle of nowhere. Fields on both sides. No buildings in sight. The hood was smoking when he got out. Daniel stared at it, having absolutely no idea what to do. He'd never even opened the hood of a car before. Why would he? People did that for him. He pulled out his phone. 5% battery, and when he unlocked it, his heart sank. No signal. Not 1 bar. Nothing. For the first time in his life, Daniel felt truly helpless. He couldn't call his assistant. Couldn't call a tow truck. Couldn't call anyone. His $800 smartphone was just an expensive paperweight. He stood there for 20 minutes watching the sky grow darker. 3 cars passed him. None stopped. Daniel tried waving, but they just drove faster. Maybe they thought he was dangerous. Maybe they just didn't care. Either way, he was alone. The wind picked up. It wasn't just a breeze anymore. It was the kind of wind that warns you something big is coming. Daniel looked at his Mercedes, at his designer clothes, at his useless phone, and felt something he'd never felt before. Actual fear. That's when Robert's old pickup truck came rumbling down the road. Robert saw the silver Mercedes from half a mile away. Saw the young man standing beside it, looking lost. His first instinct was to keep driving. Rich city kid with a fancy car. Probably already called for help on his fancy phone. But something made Robert slow down. Maybe it was thinking about Lisa, alone in the city. Maybe it was the storm coming. Maybe it was just who Robert was, deep down. He pulled up beside the Mercedes. The window of his truck squeaked as he rolled it down. Need some help, son? Daniel barely glanced at him. He saw the old truck, the worn overalls, the weathered face, and made an instant judgment. I'm fine. My assistant is sending someone. Robert looked at the phone in Daniel's hand, then at the empty road stretching in both directions. Ain't no signal out here for another 5 miles. And there's a storm coming. Bad one by the looks of it. I'll wait in my car, thanks. Daniel's voice had that tone, the one that said, I don't need help from someone like you. Robert could have driven away right then.
Should have, probably.
This kid didn't want help, didn't need help from an old farmer. But Robert sat there for a moment, engine idling, watching the storm clouds roll closer. Then he thought about Lisa again. Thought about someone treating her this way if she was stranded somewhere. He put the truck in reverse and backed up. Look, I got a landline at my place 2 miles up the road. You can call from there. Can't leave you out here in what's coming. The first drops of rain started to fall. Big, heavy drops that meant business. Daniel looked at his car, at his phone, at the empty road. Pride battled with reality, and reality won. He grabbed his leather backpack from the Mercedes and walked to the passenger side of Robert's truck. The truck smelled like dirt and diesel and hard work. Daniel sat as far from Robert as the seat would allow, his nose wrinkling slightly. He'd never been in a vehicle like this. Never been this close to someone who worked with their hands. As they pulled away, Daniel watched his Mercedes disappear in the rearview mirror. He had no idea that in the next 12 hours, everything he thought he knew about life, about people, about himself, was about to change forever. The silence in the truck was thick enough to cut with a knife. Robert kept his eyes on the road while Daniel stared out the window, watching the fields blur past. The rain was coming down harder now, drumming on the roof of the old pickup. So what brings you out to these parts? Robert asked, trying to be friendly. Daniel didn't even look at him. Just passing through. Long way from the city, I'd guess. Yeah, that was it. Just yeah. Robert went quiet after that. He'd tried to be neighborly, and that's all he got back. A one-word answer dripping with disinterest. He gripped the steering wheel a little tighter and decided to save his breath. Daniel was busy judging everything. The duct tape holding part of the dashboard together. The torn seat cover. The faded air freshener hanging from the mirror that probably stopped working in 2005. How did people live like this? His father's garage had cars worth more than this entire farm probably cost. How much further? Daniel asked, not bothering to hide the impatience in his voice. About 5 minutes now. Daniel pulled out his phone again. Still no signal. Still at 3% battery. He shoved it back in his pocket with a frustrated sigh that was just a bit too loud, a bit too dramatic. Robert glanced at him. Phone won't work out here. Nearest cell tower is in the next county. We're in what folks call a dead zone. Of course it is, Daniel muttered under his breath, but not quiet enough. They turned onto a dirt road and Daniel's judgment went into overdrive. The road was bumpy, muddy in spots from the rain. Trees lined both sides, old and thick. Finally, they pulled up to a small farmhouse. It was painted white or had been once upon a time. The paint was peeling in places. There was a front porch with a rocking chair and some flower pots. A wooden fence surrounded a small yard. Daniel looked at it like someone had just shown him a motel room with bed bugs. You live here? The way he said it. Not curious, not neutral, judgmental, dismissive. Like the house was beneath him and by extension so was Robert. Robert's jaw tightened. He'd been poor his whole life, but he'd never been ashamed of his home. It was clean. It was his. 4 generations of his family had lived here, loved here, died here. This young man with his designer clothes and his attitude had no right to look at it like that. Yeah, Robert said, his voice flat now. I live here. He got out of the truck without another word. Daniel followed, stepping carefully to avoid puddles like the mud might ruin his $200 shoes. Which it probably would. Inside, the house was simple. A small living room with an old couch, a television from the early 2000s, family photos on the walls. The kitchen was visible from the living room, separated by a counter. Everything was old but clean, lived in, loved even. Robert pointed down a short hallway. Phone's in the kitchen there. Help yourself. Daniel walked to the phone and picked it up. Dead silence. No dial tone. He pressed the receiver button a few times. Nothing. It's not working, he said, an accusation in his tone. Robert came over and tried it himself. His face fell. Storm must have knocked out the phone lines. They're above ground out here. Happens sometimes. Daniel felt panic rising in his chest. So what am I supposed to do? Wait it out. Lines usually come back up within a day or so. A day? Daniel's voice went up an octave. I can't stay here for a day. You can't leave either, Robert said calmly. Storm's getting worse. Roads will flood. Even if you could walk back to your car, you wouldn't be able to drive it anywhere. As if on cue, lightning flashed through the windows, followed by a crack of thunder so loud it shook the house. The lights flickered once, twice, then went out completely. They stood in darkness for a moment. Then Robert sighed. That'll be the power lines. Should have expected that. Daniel heard him moving around in the dark, opening drawers. A match struck and suddenly there was light. Robert was lighting old kerosene lamps, the kind people used before electricity. He placed them around the room, creating small islands of warm, flickering light. You do this often? Daniel asked, and there it was again, that tone. Like roughing it was something primitive, something to be pitied. Often enough, Robert said. Power goes out every few months out here. You learn to manage. Daniel pulled out his phone one more time. 2% battery, no signal. He was completely cut off from his world. No internet, no social media, no way to call for help. He felt like he'd been transported back to the Stone Age. I'll make up the spare room for you, Robert said. Bathroom's down the hall. Towels are in the closet if you want to wash up. Where's the spare room? Daniel asked. My daughter's old room. She moved to the city a few years back. Robert walked down the hall and opened a door. The room was small. A single bed with a handmade quilt. A wooden desk and chair. Bookshelves lining one wall. Everything neat and carefully preserved, like Robert was keeping it ready for his daughter to come home any time. Daniel looked around with barely concealed disappointment. He was used to hotel suites, king-sized beds, room service. This felt like sleeping in a museum exhibit about rural poverty. Thanks, he said. But the word came out empty. Obligatory. Robert nodded and left him alone. Daniel sat on the bed and it creaked under his weight. He put his head in his hands. How had his day gone so wrong? This morning he'd been in a mansion. Now he was trapped in a farmhouse with no power, no phone, no internet, with some old farmer who probably didn't even have Netflix. In the kitchen, Robert was making dinner. He could hear Daniel moving around in Lisa's room, could imagine the young man's disgust with everything. Robert had spent his whole life being looked down on by people like Daniel. Rich people who drove through his county on their way to somewhere better, who saw his way of life as something to pity or mock. He cracked eggs into a pan. That's all he had that was easy to make without power. Eggs and bread. Simple food. Probably not what the young man was used to. Probably expecting some five-star meal. Well, Robert wasn't running a restaurant. This was what he had, and it would have to be enough. Daniel appeared in the doorway. Is there anything to eat? Making eggs and toast. That work for you? Daniel wanted to say no. Wanted to complain, but his stomach was growling and pride doesn't fill an empty belly. Sure. Fine. They ate in silence at the small kitchen table, the kerosene lamp flickering between them. Robert ate like a man used to simple food. Daniel ate like he was doing the food a favor by putting it in his mouth. Every bite looked like an effort. So what do? Robert asked, trying once more to be civil. I'm figuring that out, Daniel said. Figuring it out? Yeah, just graduated from Stanford. Taking some time before I start working. Robert nearly choked on his toast. Stanford, of course. This kid probably spent more on 1 year of college than Robert made in 5 years. That's quite an accomplishment. Daniel shrugged. It's just a degree. Just a degree. Robert thought about Lisa. How hard she'd worked to get through state college. How she'd taken out loans, worked 2 jobs, studied until midnight every night. How proud she was when she graduated. This kid said it like it meant nothing. Like everything in his life meant nothing. Your folks must be proud, Robert said. My father has expectations. There's a difference. Something in Daniel's voice changed. Robert heard it. A crack in the armor of privilege. Pain, maybe, or loneliness. But before Robert could ask more, Daniel stood up. I'm tired. I'm going to bed. He left without another word, without even saying thank you for the meal. Robert sat alone in the lamplight, listening to the storm rage outside. He cleaned the dishes by hand, dried them, put them away. Then he sat in his rocking chair with a cup of coffee, watching the lightning through the window. He thought about his daughter, about how she'd left this place to build a better life. He didn't blame her. There wasn't anything here for young people anymore. But he missed her. Missed her voice, her laugh, the way she used to sit with him on the porch and talk about her dreams. In Lisa's room, Daniel lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The bed was uncomfortable. The house was too quiet except for the storm. He was used to city noise, sirens and traffic and life happening outside his window. Here, there was just thunder and rain and silence. He got up and looked around the room more carefully. Really looked this time. The books on the shelves were about farming, about business, about law. Debate trophies lined the top shelf. Photographs showed a young girl growing up, always with Robert beside her. Birthday parties, school events, graduation. In every photo, Robert was smiling like his daughter was the sun itself. On the desk, Daniel found a letter. He knew he shouldn't read it, but he did anyway. It was dated 3 months ago, written in neat handwriting. The words hit him like a punch to the gut. Lisa was offering to help her father with hospital bills. She was worried about him. She loved him. She wanted to ease his burden. Daniel set the letter down carefully, his hands shaking slightly. He thought about his own father. When was the last time they'd had a real conversation? When was the last time his father had smiled at him the way Robert smiled at his daughter in those photos? He lay back down, but sleep didn't come. Outside, the storm raged on. Inside, something was beginning to shift. Something small but significant. The first crack in Daniel's carefully constructed worldview. Daniel didn't sleep much that night. The storm hammered the roof for hours, and every crack of thunder made him jump. But it wasn't just the storm keeping him awake. It was that letter. Those words from a daughter to her father. Words that dripped with love and concern and a kind of relationship Daniel couldn't quite understand. Around 6 in the morning, the storm finally moved on. Daniel heard sounds from the kitchen and smelled coffee. Real coffee. Not the fancy stuff he was used to, but coffee nonetheless. He got up, still wearing yesterday's clothes, and walked out to find Robert already dressed and moving around the kitchen. "Morning," Robert said, not looking up from the stove. "Coffee's on the counter. Cups in the cabinet above. Thanks." Daniel poured himself a cup and sat at the table. The coffee was strong, bitter, the kind that wakes you up whether you want it to or not. "Did you sleep?" "Some old habits. I'm usually up before dawn." They sat in silence for a moment. Different from last night's silence, though. This one felt less hostile, more uncertain, like both of them were trying to figure out what to say. "Look," Daniel started, then stopped. He wasn't good at apologies. Never had to be. "About yesterday. The way I acted, that wasn't okay." Robert turned around, surprised. "We all have bad days." "No." Daniel shook his head. "It wasn't about having a bad day. I was rude. I judged you, your home, your life. I was wrong to do that." Robert studied him for a long moment. What changed? Daniel thought about lying, about brushing it off. But something about sitting in this kitchen, drinking this coffee, after reading that letter last night made him want to be honest. "I found a letter. From your daughter." "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have read it, but I did." Robert's face softened. "Lisa writes every month. Sometimes twice a month. She loves you a lot. Anyone can see that. I'm lucky." Robert sat down across from Daniel. "She's the best thing I ever did with my life. Everything else, the farm, all of it doesn't matter compared to her." The letter said something about hospital bills. Robert's face clouded. "Had a heart scare 2 years ago. Needed surgery. Insurance covered some of it, but not enough. You know how it is?" Then he stopped, looking at Daniel. "Actually, you probably don't know how it is." "You're right. I don't." Daniel took another sip of coffee. "My father owns one of the biggest tech companies in the country. I grew up with everything. Money was never something I had to think about. It was just always there. Must be nice, like you'd think so." Daniel surprised himself with his honesty. "But it's lonely. My father sees me as an investment, a continuation of his legacy. My mother left when I was 8, married someone else. I have everything money can buy and nothing that actually matters." Robert was quiet. He'd spent his whole life assuming rich people had it easy, that money solved every problem. Maybe that wasn't completely true. "What about friends? People your own age?" "I have people who hang around because of who my father is." "Does that count as friends?" Daniel laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I just graduated from Stanford. Top of my class. My father wants me to start at his company, work my way up, eventually take over. But I don't want to just be handed everything. I want to earn something. Prove I'm capable of more than just being his son. So what's stopping you? Fear, maybe? I don't know. I've never actually done anything on my own. Never had to work for anything. How do I know if I'm actually capable or if I'm just riding on my father's success? Robert got up and refilled both their coffee cups. Can I tell you something? Something I learned from 40 years of farming? Please, the soil doesn't care who you are. Doesn't care about your name, your family, your money. You can be a king or a beggar, makes no difference. The soil only cares about what you put into it. You plant good seeds, work hard, water it, care for it, you'll get a harvest. You neglect it, you get nothing. That's honest work. Maybe that's what you're looking for. Daniel thought about that. Really thought about it. How do you keep going? When the money's tight, when things are hard? Because this land is mine. Not because I own it, though I do, but because I've put my sweat into it. My grandfather's buried up on that hill. My father, too. My daughter learned to walk in that field out there. This isn't just a farm. It's my family's story. When things get hard, I remember why I'm doing it. I don't have anything like that. No story, no purpose, then make one. You're young. You got time to figure out what matters to you. They talked for another hour. Really talked. Daniel asked about farming, about what it was like to work the same land for 40 years. Robert asked about technology, about the world beyond these fields. They were different in almost every way. But in that kitchen, over bitter coffee and simple conversation, something was building. Understanding, maybe. Or respect. Around 9 o'clock, Robert stood up. I need to check on the animals, see what damage the storm did. Want to come? Daniel almost said no. He was still wearing his expensive clothes, his shoes that cost more than most people's monthly rent. But something made him say yes instead. Outside, the morning was clean and bright after the storm. The air smelled like rain and earth. Robert walked toward the barn and Daniel followed. Inside, chickens clucked and moved around. A couple of cows stood in their stalls. Everything was simple, basic, real. This is what I do every day, Robert said, gathering eggs from the nests. Feed them, care for them, collect the eggs. Not glamorous, not exciting, but it's honest work and it matters. Daniel watched him move with practiced ease. Every motion efficient, purposeful. This man knew exactly who he was and what he was doing. There was a kind of peace in that Daniel had never experienced. Can I help? The words came out before Daniel could stop them. Robert looked at him at his designer clothes and almost said no. But something in the young man's face made him change his mind. Sure, here. He handed Daniel a basket. Just reach under the hens and collect the eggs. Gently. They won't hurt you if you're careful. Daniel's first attempt was awkward. The hen squawked and jumped away. The second attempt wasn't much better. But by the fifth hen, he was getting the hang of it. There was something satisfying about the weight of a warm egg in his hand, about knowing he'd done something useful, even if it was small. They worked together for the next 2 hours. Robert showed Daniel how to feed the animals, how to check the water systems, how to inspect the fence line for damage. Daniel got mud on his shoes, dirt under his fingernails, sweat on his forehead. And for the first time in years, he felt like he was actually doing something real. You're a quick learner, Robert said as they walked back to the house. I've never done anything like this before, never worked with my hands. Well, you did good. Thanks for the help. That simple thanks meant more to Daniel than any praise his father had ever given him, because he'd earned it. Back in the house, they made lunch together. Sandwiches, nothing fancy. They ate on the porch watching the fields dry out under the sun. Can I ask you something? Daniel said. That letter from your daughter. She offered to help with your bills. Why didn't you let her? Robert was quiet for a long time. Pride, I suppose. I'm her father. I should be taking care of her, not the other way around. She worked so hard to get where she is. I don't want to be a burden. But you're not a burden. She loves you. She wants to help, I know. But accepting help, especially from your kids, feels like admitting you failed somehow. My father never taught me that, Daniel said softly. He taught me that accepting help is weakness, that you should never show vulnerability, never admit you need anyone. I think that's why I was so rude to you yesterday. You offered help and I couldn't handle it. Help isn't weakness, son. It's being human. We all need help sometimes. Daniel looked out at the fields. You helped me last night. You didn't have to. I was rude, dismissive, judgmental, but you gave me a place to stay, fed me, didn't ask for anything in return. Why? Robert thought about his answer. Because I'd want someone to do the same for my daughter if she was stranded somewhere. Because leaving someone out in a storm isn't right, no matter how rude they are. Because that's what neighbors do, even if you're just a neighbor for one night. Something broke open in Daniel's chest. His eyes got wet and he wiped them quickly. Thank you. Really. Thank you. They sat in comfortable silence, watching clouds drift across the sky. The phone line was still dead. Daniel's Mercedes was still broken down on the side of the road. But somehow, none of that seemed as important as it had yesterday. You know what I've been thinking about? Daniel said. Your farm. You said small farms are struggling because big agricultural companies changed everything. What if there was a way to help? What if someone invested in sustainable farming practices, supported small farms instead of trying to replace them? That's a nice dream. But dreams don't pay bills. No, Daniel said, an idea forming in his mind. But money can. And I know people with money. For the first time, Robert saw something different in the young man's face. Not boredom, not judgment, purpose. Like a light had switched on behind his eyes. I can't change what happened yesterday, Daniel said. Can't take back how I acted. But maybe I can do something that matters. Something real. Would you help me understand more about farming? About what small farms need to survive? Robert looked at him, seeing past the expensive clothes and the privilege to something genuine underneath. Yeah, I'd be happy to. They spent the rest of the afternoon talking about farming, about the challenges small farmers face, about what real solutions might look like. Not surface-level conversation, but deep, detailed, meaningful discussion. Daniel took notes on his phone until the battery died, then borrowed paper and pen from Robert. As the sun started to set, they heard a truck coming up the road. Robert's neighbor checking on him after the storm. The neighbor had a working phone. Daniel could finally call for help, get his car towed, get back to his life. But as he made the calls, arranged everything, he realized his life wouldn't be the same. Couldn't be the same. Something had shifted. He'd come here as one person and was leaving as someone different. Someone who'd learned that real wealth wasn't in a bank account, but in knowing who you are and why you're here. The tow truck arrived around 7 that evening. Daniel's Mercedes was loaded up, destined for a repair shop in the city. His assistant had arranged for a car service to pick him up and drive him back to New York. Everything was handled, organized, back to normal. Except nothing felt normal anymore. Daniel stood by Robert's truck, his leather bag over his shoulder. The old farmer was checking his mailbox, giving Daniel space to make his arrangements. The evening air was cool, cicadas singing their summer song. All set? Robert asked, walking back over. Yeah, car should be here in about 20 minutes. Daniel paused. Listen, I want to pay you. For the room, the food, your time. Robert shook his head. Don't need payment for being a decent human being, please. Let me do something. You already did. You helped me with the morning chores. We're even. Daniel knew arguing wouldn't help. Robert had his pride, and Daniel understood that now in a way he hadn't yesterday. Then at least let me have your phone number. I'd like to stay in touch if that's okay. Robert looked surprised. You really want to keep talking to an old farmer? I really want to keep talking to someone who taught me more in 24 hours than I learned in 4 years of college. Robert smiled, really smiled, and gave Daniel his number. They stood there in comfortable silence until the black car appeared down the road, sleek and expensive, completely out of place against the rural backdrop. The driver got out, opened the door. Daniel turned to Robert and, instead of shaking hands, pulled the older man into a hug. Robert was startled at first, then hugged him back. Thank you, Daniel said quietly, for everything. You take care of yourself, son. Daniel got in the car. As they pulled away, he looked back to see Robert standing in his driveway, waving. Something about that image, that simple gesture, made Daniel's chest tight. The drive back to New York took 4 hours. Daniel didn't sleep. He sat in the back seat thinking. Really thinking about his life, about what he wanted, about what mattered. He thought about Robert's hands weathered from work. About the way he talked about his daughter with such pride. About soil that doesn't care who you are, only what you put into it. By the time they reached his apartment in Manhattan, a luxury high-rise with a view of Central Park, Daniel knew what he had to do. The next morning he called his father. Dad, I need to talk to you about something important. His father, Jonathan, was in his office at the company headquarters. Can it wait? I'm in the middle of quarterly projections. No, it can't wait. I need an hour of your time. Something in Daniel's voice made his father pause. All right. Come by the office at 2. Daniel spent the morning preparing. He wrote down everything Robert had told him about small farms, about sustainable agriculture, about the challenges facing rural communities. He researched. He made notes. He built a presentation. By 2 o'clock, he had something real, something solid, something that mattered. His father's office was on the 40th floor, all glass and steel and power. Jonathan sat behind a massive desk reading something on his tablet. You look like you haven't slept. I haven't, not really. Daniel sat down across from him. Dad, I want to talk about the venture capital division. You're finally ready to join the company? Not exactly. I want to propose a new initiative. Sustainable agriculture investment. Small farms, family operations, environmentally responsible practices. His father set down the tablet. Agriculture? Daniel, we're a tech company. We're an investment company that happens to focus on tech, but our venture capital arm has the flexibility to explore other sectors. Daniel opened his laptop and started his presentation. The agricultural industry is worth over $1 trillion globally, but it's dominated by massive corporations that prioritize profit over sustainability. Small farms are dying, rural communities are suffering, and we have an opportunity to make a real difference while building a profitable division. Jonathan listened, really listened. Daniel laid out projections, market analysis, potential returns. But more than that, he talked about impact, about families like Robert's, about land that held generations of stories, about communities that deserved better than being forgotten. Where is this coming from? His father asked when Daniel finished. Yesterday you were taking scenic drives. Today you're passionate about farming? Daniel told him everything. About the breakdown, about Robert, about the storm and the farmhouse and the conversations that changed everything. He didn't leave anything out. Not his initial rudeness, not his judgments, not the lesson he'd learned about real wealth. This farmer, Jonathan said, he helped you even though you were rude to him? He did. He saw someone who needed help and he helped. No strings attached. No expectations of repayment. Just basic human kindness. Jonathan was quiet for a long time. He walked to his office window looking out over the city. You know, my grandfather was a farmer, back in Korea. He lost everything in the war, came here with nothing. Worked 3 jobs to send my father to school. My father built a small business, saved every penny to send me to college. I built this company to prove we could be more than poor immigrants, more than people who got looked down on. Daniel had never heard this story. His father never talked about the past. But somewhere along the way, Jonathan continued, I forgot why I started. I forgot about families like my grandfather's, about the people who work hard and still struggle. I focused on success and forgot about significance. He turned back to Daniel. You want to do this? Build this division? It won't be easy. You'll face resistance. People will doubt you, I know. But I want to try. I want to do something that matters. Jonathan studied his son, seeing him differently maybe for the first time. All right. You've got 6 months to build a proposal. If it's solid, if the numbers work, we'll fund it. But you're doing this right. No shortcuts, no special treatment because you're my son. You earn it. I wouldn't want it any other way. They shook hands. Not as father and son, but as partners in something meaningful. Daniel spent the next 2 weeks working 18-hour days. He contacted agricultural experts, economists, sustainability consultants. He built financial models, risk assessments, market analyses, and every few days he called Robert asking questions, learning, understanding the reality of farming from someone who lived it. You're really serious about this? Robert said during one call. I am. You showed me something I never knew I was missing, purpose, meaning. I can't go back to just existing. I need to do something that matters. Well, I'm proud of you, son. You're doing good work. Those words meant everything. At the end of 2 weeks, Daniel had something real. A comprehensive proposal for a sustainable agriculture investment initiative. $50 million in initial funding. Support for small farms, sustainable practices, rural community development, not charity. Investment. Real investment that would generate returns while making a difference. He presented it to the board. They were skeptical at first. Agriculture, why? But Daniel had done his homework. The numbers were solid. The opportunity was real. And his passion was undeniable. They approved it. Daniel's first action was to call Robert. I have a proposition for you. What kind of proposition? We're launching this initiative. We need consultants who actually know farming, who can evaluate proposals and identify good investments. It would be 2 days a week, consulting work, decent salary. You'd work with our team, help us understand the agricultural sector from the ground level. Robert was silent. Daniel, I'm just a farmer. I don't know anything about big business. Why do you know what matters? You know honest work. That's exactly what we need. And Robert? The office is in Philadelphia, near where your daughter works. Another long silence. You're serious, completely serious. I need someone I trust, someone who won't let me lose sight of why we're doing this. That's you. Can I think about it? Of course. Take your time. 3 days later, Robert called back. I talked to Lisa. She thinks I'm crazy, but she's excited. When do I start? Whenever you're ready. Daniel arranged everything. A fair consulting contract, an office, resources. But more than that, he arranged for the company to acquire Robert's farm, not to take it from him, but to make it a demonstration site for sustainable practices. Robert would continue running it, but with financial support, modern equipment, and technical assistance. It would become a model for other small farms. When the paperwork was signed, when everything was official, Daniel drove back out to the farm. This time he didn't get lost. He knew the way. Robert met him in the driveway. They stood there for a moment, 2 men from completely different worlds who'd found unexpected friendship. I keep thinking about that night, Robert said, about how you broke down right there on the road, about how I almost didn't stop. I'm glad you did. Me too. You've changed my life, Daniel. Lisa's coming home this weekend. First time in months. She wants to see what's happening with the farm, wants to talk about the future. I haven't felt this hopeful in years. You changed my life first, Daniel said. You showed me what real wealth looks like. It's not money in a bank account. It's knowing who you are and what you stand for. It's having something you'd fight for, someone you'd do anything for. You have that with your daughter. I want to build that for myself. They walked through the fields together, talking about plans for the farm, about the initiative, about the future. The corn was growing tall, healthy and green in the summer sun. You know what my grandfather used to say? Robert asked. He said you can measure a man's wealth by what he'd have left if he lost all his money. By that measure, I'm the richest man I know. Daniel looked out at the fields, at the farmhouse where he'd learned what really mattered. By that measure, I was broke when my car broke down on that road. But I'm getting richer every day. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the wind move through the corn. 2 men whose lives had intersected for one stormy night, who'd chosen to turn that intersection into something lasting, something meaningful, something that would change more than just their own lives. Thank you, Daniel said quietly, for stopping that day, for giving me a chance even when I didn't deserve it. We all deserve a chance, Robert replied. Sometimes we just need someone to see us clearly enough to give us one. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Daniel's phone buzzed with messages from his office, from his team, from his new life of purpose and meaning. But he silenced it. Some moments were too important to interrupt, some friendships too valuable to take for granted. He'd come to this place as a lost, entitled young man with everything and nothing. He was leaving as someone different, someone better, someone who understood that the greatest gift you can give another person is to see them, really see them, and choose kindness anyway. And it all started with an old farmer who refused to drive past someone in need, even when that someone didn't deserve his help. 1 year later, Daniel stood in Robert's farmhouse again. But everything was different now. The house had been repaired with fresh paint and new boards, but it still felt like home. Inside, people filled every corner. Robert's daughter Lisa was setting out food, laughing with her husband. Friends from neighboring farms, people from the community, and Daniel's colleagues from the city had all gathered together. Daniel and Robert stepped onto the porch, away from the noise. The September air was cool and the fields were ready for harvest. A year ago I was eating dinner alone most nights, Robert said. Now look at this. You deserve it, Daniel replied. All of it. The Sustainable Agriculture Initiative had exceeded every projection. They'd funded 32 farms, creating jobs and revitalizing rural communities. Young people were staying, building futures without leaving everything behind. And Robert had been essential to making it all work. Lisa told me last week she's proud of me, Robert said, his voice thick with emotion. My daughter is proud of me. Do you know what that feels like? I'm starting to, Daniel said quietly. His relationship with his father had changed too. They had real dinners now, talking about things that mattered. Jonathan had even visited the farm, spending 3 hours with Robert sharing stories about his own grandfather who'd been a farmer in Korea. Inside, Lisa called them in. Daniel stood before the group and told them the whole story. His rudeness, his judgment, his complete lack of understanding. Robert could have driven past me, he said. Should have, probably. But he didn't. He saw someone who needed help, and he helped. That kindness changed everything. He handed Robert an envelope containing his year 1 bonus from the initiative's profits. Robert opened it, eyes going wide. I can't accept this. You earned it. Every penny, Robert's voice shook. My whole life I worked hard and never asked for handouts. But this is more than money. This is being seen, being valued, being told that my work matters. He walked over to Daniel and pulled him into a hug. The room erupted in applause. Later that night, they sat on the porch under the stars. That night, I thought everything had gone wrong, Daniel said. But actually, everything went exactly right. My car broke down in front of exactly the right person. You think it was fate? Robert asked. I think it was grace. You gave me a mirror to see myself clearly. You showed me what really matters, Robert smiled. The rudest, most lost people are usually the ones who need help the most. I didn't stop for the person you were acting like. I stopped for the person I hoped you could become. Daniel wiped tears from his face. Thank you for seeing something in me I couldn't see in myself. Thank you for being brave enough to change. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars. Two unlikely friends who'd found each other at exactly the right moment. The lesson was simple but profound. In our darkest moments, when we're truly lost, sometimes we need a stranger's kindness to find our way home. And when we receive that grace, we can let it transform us into people who extend the same kindness to others. One act of kindness from a farmer who had every reason to drive past had changed 2 lives. But it didn't stop there. It rippled out to 32 farms, hundreds of jobs, thousands of people. Communities revitalized. Families reunited. Hope restored. All because one man chose kindness over convenience. All because another man was brave enough to accept that kindness and let it change him. Kindness recognizes no class, no status, no wealth. It sees only a human being in need, and when offered freely without judgment or expectation, it has the power to change everything. That's the real wealth, not money in the bank, but knowing you're part of something bigger, that your life has purpose, that you left the world a little bit better, a little bit kinder, a little bit more connected than you found it. Sometimes we all break down, and in those moments we can push people away or accept kindness from unexpected places and let it transform us. Daniel and Robert both made that choice, to be open, to be changed, to be better. And because they did, hundreds of others got the same chance. The greatest gift we can give each other is simply this. I see you. You matter. You're not alone. That's enough. That's everything.